Hello, and welcome to the Temple of Silver Star's public class series, selection from Magick Without Tears. My name is Ruth, and with me is Rex, my co-host for this class series. We are both academic track instructors with the Temple of the Silver Star. We are a nonprofit philemic organization that's been around 12 years, and we provide two tracks of training, the academic and the initiatory. So you're seeing the academic track here with our classes. Both tracks have designed to provide preparatory training in ceremonial magic, Raja Yoga, Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and much more. Using these foundational tools, we seek to guide the student towards a deeper apprehension of the true will, law of Thelema, and his or her own psycho-spiritual constitution. You can visit our website, TOTSS.org, to learn more about joining the academic track or being an initiate. And we have academic campuses sort of all over the world. We have a campus here in Los Angeles, where I live, and we have a Seattle area public study group, which Rex is the head of currently. And so we're co-hosting this series of weekly interactive classes discussing selections from Aleister Crowley's Magick Without Tears. And all of this is available, the Magick Without Tears books, is on hermetic.com. So if you're interested in reading and following along, hermetic.com is a great resource for Aleister Crowley books. So tonight, to continue the series, this is our third class, and we're kind of skipping around because this is a selections course. So we're going to start off with discussing Chapter 12, discussing the left-hand path and the Black Brotherhood. So I thought I'd pick a sort of interesting topic that people kind of, debate about or don't know much about and have some fear around, and sort of just, look at the text and see what Crowley has to say on this matter. So, and starting off, there are other texts that he references, particularly a book called The Vision and the Voice. Within this text, The Vision and the Voice, or otherwise known as Liber 418, Liber just means book, so it's number 418. And that's also available on hermetic.com. I'll post this in the chat window, and if you're watching it on YouTube, you'll be able to see it below. Should go to everyone. Cool. Rex, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. Let's get started.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, this is a really interesting chapter. I think, some of the most interesting things about this chapter is that people don't really know what the left-hand path is and how it differentiates from being a Black brother. Because as you read in the text, those are two different things. So it's really cool to get those things sort of separated out and, sort of leave our assumptions and things at the door and just sort of figure out like what the heck Crowley's talking about and why it's important in practicing magic. Rex, did you have anything to add to that, like just the sort of subject matter?
I think that, like you said, he's defining the terms here at the very beginning, talking about the difference between, Black magicians and what he calls the Black Brotherhood. And I think in some ways this chapter might be misnamed slightly, because he does focus more on the Black Brotherhood throughout the chapter and a lot less of what we have at least contemporarily come to understand as the left-hand path. And so I think that at least for me, as I was reading through it and I was looking at it, I come to find that focusing on Crowley's definition of left-hand path or the Black Brotherhood is quite a bit different, I think, than what most people think about when they think about LHP or black magic.
Yeah, it was interesting to I was just like, what's the origin of the left-hand path, right-hand path, dichotomy? And so I looked it up, and it's apparently it originated sort of with Madame Blavatsky, who was a Russian occultist. She sort of founded the Theosophical movement, in the 19th century. And I'm just resource it, my resource is Wikipedia. So if someone is a Blavatsky scholar, please correct me if I'm wrong. But, she was traveling through India and studying, Southeast Asian traditions, or Indian traditions. And, she sort of saw this like tantric path that was, it was rebellious. These people were kind of doing weird things. They were having sex, and if they were vegetarians, they were eating meat. They were going to graveyards and like interacting with corpses. Just these tantric practices that were pretty kind of scandalous in their culture, but they were a method of spiritual liberation for certain sects of Hinduism and Buddhism. So basically Blavatsky saw this and kind of was like, oh, that's like, maybe our version of black magic. So she sort of put her own, I think, Western framework around it, and was like, well, people who follow, the rules and, wash their hands, like I believe the Brahmins, of the Hindu path are kind of very into like not associating with bad people and, having special diets. And so that would be considered like maybe a right-hand path if you were in the Indian tradition, while the tantrics who were like doing sex magic were, seen as like a left-hand path. So that's kind of where a lot of this kind of dichotomy arose from. I believe there's even like a Sanskrit word, I'm going to mangle it, Vamachara, literally meaning the left-hand way. And that was what Blavatsky kind of coined the term. And she, was like, well, I am, right-hand path. And, that's what the Theosophical Society is. And so the left-hand path was kind of seen as a threat to society, according to, her work, which is interesting. Because a lot of people see Blavatsky as kind of this sort of menacing figure. I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched any Dario Argento films, but, it's kind of rumored she's the inspiration for the school mistress. So Scarab Core says, it tends to be used in a purgative, it's pejorative, essentially, by a lot of folks. It's not seen as a positive thing. And it's interesting, considering who Crowley was, and he was seen, as kind of a left-hand path sort of person. So, we'll go further into that, but.
Well, it's almost like any kind of rebellion could be potentially called left-hand path, right? I mean, if you're breaking taboos or if you're going against the norm in any way, that sometimes could be construed as being left-hand path, whether that's right or not, or by whatever definition we're working from.
There's also this interesting distinction made between one who seeks to acquire power and knowledge, it's sort of this like acquisitive kind of approach, versus the person who enters into this work with the intention of altering oneself and actually evolving and letting it change you. Versus
right.
And that's kind of where you start to get into like the distinction between a left-hand path and a black brother, I think. And we're using the term black brother, it's not racial at all. It's kind of more just the polarity of like what it would Crowley would consider white magic, which is like kind of light and shadow and darkness, just to clarify those things. But it is really interesting because throughout the text he's like, the left-hand path can be a path of discipline and liberation. It's not conforming to society. The right-hand path is like, if I do everything that I'm supposed to, if I follow these rules, if I'm very disciplined and, like looking towards the light and, following all these like specific things and being a good member of society, then golly, I'm gonna, reach that abyss point and become a master. While the left-hand path is more like, I'm going to see how far I can take it into the depths of like depravity, which isn't a bad thing. If you're not hurting people, if you're hurting, if you're doing things to yourself, it's your own free will and your choice. So, it can be a really liberating, cool thing. And I think Thelema kind of balances the two. Thelema isn't necessarily like, I'm going to follow all the rules of the society I live in and be the best member of society I can be. It's, it's more like, well, maybe I should go out to the desert and, sit on this rock until my neck hurts a little bit. So yeah, I do think that people, left-hand path kind of gets a little bit of a, sort of people are scared of it, which if you're a conformist in society, you would be scared of it. So fear is failure, as we remember. Crowley didn't really, so Scarab Court is saying Crowley didn't identify with the left-hand path, but other folks did. Be worth discussing why that is, or what context these perspectives are meaningful. Yeah, so we're going to go through the text and kind of suss out some of this some more and what he's talking about. And that way, would the right-hand path fall into the idea of restriction as sin and becoming black? Not necessarily. There's a difference between like restriction and discipline. I think, and only experience can really tell you what that is. So, discipline is putting limitations around something, but is to your will, I think. And restriction is more like, this is really going against like my true will. So as we look at the text, Crowley talks about, the grade system. And this was really important for him to differentiate, kind of left-hand path practices versus, oh, you stepped too far and now you're like trying to acquire power and being like a black brother. The bad, you've gone too far. And that comes around adeptus exemptus, which is 7 equals 4. And that's kind of where you're at, so all of the the AA and the Golden Dawn type systems are all sort of graded, and they match sort of like the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. And so when you basically go up the Sephiroth of the Tree of the Life, you'd be at Hesed at this degree, and you'd want to cross to Bina, which is like the magister, you're basically the master of the temple, is the next grade. But to do that, you have to cross the abyss. And crossing the abyss is like this crazy ordeal. You hear a lot of people talk about it. Rex, did you have anything to add to that? Just the grade system and that spot?
I think that's where Crowley does make that distinction of what he's talking about when he's talking about Black Brothers. It's that leap over the abyss, through the abyss, and that experience, and how that experience is different for someone who has completely eliminated or identified themselves completely with the universe, as he calls it. And so that, if you're familiar with the Thelemic, the iconography there, you're basically, when you cross the abyss, you're putting all of yourself into the cup of Babylon, every drop of your blood, so to speak, and not holding anything back.
It is kind of a death, it's like an ego death.
Yeah, it's an annihilation of that sort of thing. And I think where he's making that distinction is that these Black Brothers are perceived to be not 100%. There's some obscurity there where they're tricking themselves into thinking that they're all in when they really aren't. They're misidentifying ego material with power, and I think that's where he gets into a lot of the descriptions in this letters, specifically.
Yeah, I'm just going to read, I was kind of researching how to best explain this. And so Lanvilo Duquette is one of our favorite teachers. In his book, Angels, Demons, and Gods of the New Millennium, he says, on the Tree of Life, this crisis comes when the candidate's initiatory career finds him or her ready to move from the level of consciousness represented by this fourth Sephirah, the highest in the point of the actual, it's like the actual world, to the inscrutable emptiness of the third Sephirah, of the supernal triad, the world of the ideal. There is no path leading from 4 to 3. An abyss of indefinable mystery yawns before the candidate, who must rely solely on the immense gravitational pull of the 3 and his or her own initiatory momentum to hurl him through the looking glass of the abyss. So it's this kind of huge transition from, okay, you're a magician, you're super cool, you're doing your work, whatever that might be, and then all of a sudden you have to let go of the world that you live in and enter the world of the supernals. And so, that's becomes really difficult. And once you do that, you become like, I think it's Magister Templi, master of the temple. And just so people have an idea of like the grade system, I'm going to post this in the chat, and there's YouTube. This is from like a resource on the AA, and it describes all the grades. So you can kind of understand like the initiatory sort of path that you're trying to achieve. You're working like from the bottom up to the top of the tree. And so this is like a really key area. There's a few areas where you have to kind of really like, make the leap. And this is one of the biggest, obviously. So that's just a little bit of like what we're talking about. If you're totally unfamiliar with like, the grade system, and it follows like the Kabbalistic tree of life. And so, and just, I mean, when Crowley, going back to the text, Crowley kind of explains like, there's a difference, if there is a difference at all between white or the black adept in similar cases, it is that one, working by love under will, achieves a marriage with a new idea, while the other, merely grabbing, adds a concubine to his harem of slaves. So, I think Crowley is really into the idea of like, dissolution and merging, rather than kind of, if you want to chime in, please. You just turn on your microphone.
Sure. Did the mic work?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Actually, like when I read through this particular letter, one of the things I'm picking up for is like, okay, what's the line where the teaching actually lies in? Because there's a lot of context that Crowley likes to put into his writing. But every now and again, if you just search for it, you find like the plain English, here's the point kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I would say it's probably the line like right after the one you just cited. So it says, the about to be black brother constantly restricts himself. He's satisfied with a very limited ideal. He's afraid of losing his individuality. And it reminds me of the Nordic twaddle about race pollution. Which is interesting and kind of apropos of our times a little bit. So what he's defining here as the black brother is someone who's kind of constructed a really brittle identity, conflated that identity with their individuality, and that identity can't account for like any greater experiences that would transcend what that person just happens to be at that particular minute. And if I was going to say where he cribbed this idea from, I would say that there's sort of an interesting connection between Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch and a will to power, and some of the more Crowleyan ideas of the true will. There's nuances here that make them distinct, but what he's kind of describing here is in Thus Spake Zarathustra's The Last Man. It's a person who's just kind of like huddled down, is not getting any new information, is not provided with any sort of a context that they would have to be able to grow, and therefore they're just going to stagnate and eventually kind of wear away. Now, at the same time, like he didn't say, "Oh, well, just like grab a copy of Thus Spake Zarathustra," like
yeah, he wouldn't do that
guy.
yeah, he wouldn't do that.
Well, and I mean, he might, but like even then, you wouldn't be able to go pick up a paperback copy of it. So
Sure.
better to articulate the ideas in a unique way. But that's probably at the core of what he's really talking about with his black brothers.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, he even goes on to talk about the the sand roses metaphor, mm-hmm. and I found that really touching because he later goes on to talk about the vision of the voice, and there's this sort of vision he has of these little pyramid piles of dust. And he says, if you turn into a pile of dust and you're a black brother, that's like the worst thing that could happen because you could blow away. Like your form is gone. You're so attached to form. And that is really like one of the attributes of Binah is she is the giver and taker of form. She is Saturn. So thank you for bringing that up. It is the attachment that, that you can't let go. That is kind of the poison, I think, of the Black Brotherhood. Rex, did you have anything to add to that?
Not too much. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of materialism involved there too, and maybe a misunderstanding of what the purpose is. I've I've often heard Black brothers described as someone in a Gnostic context who is, they think that they've found it when they've made contact with the demiurge, for example. They think that they found God, when that isn't, they haven't quite gotten there. They're almost there, but they've kind of fooled themselves into thinking that they've attained something.
Well, I mean, that's the scary thing, though, is that if you are, in fact, in the authentic sense, a Black brother, you probably don't know it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where kind of that crossing the abyss stage comes in, because it is this huge leap of faith that you sort of have to confront. When you read like a lot of this, it talks about just vision of the voice, and he quotes from that. And the more and more I read it, the more I'm like, well, a lot of this is just about reaching Babylon, and Babylon's like, here's my cup, like put all of yourself in it, like let's go, let's ride across chaos on the beast. And to trust someone else, you have to be very vulnerable, so I believe to cross the abyss, you have to be like, all right, I don't know what's going to happen, I'm going to let go of control, which is something that's really hard to do if you're a Black brother, and let Babylon take over. Jason is saying, when AC talks about Hindu trance states as being different from crossing the abyss, what is he saying? That K and C, H and G is not crossing the abyss, that temporary ego loss due to something like pain or drugs isn't crossing the abyss, or what? It's a great question. He does say it has to be like something that becomes more permanent than just a trance state. Trance states are, you don't live in a trance state forever, but when you cross the abyss, you are fundamentally like kind of rearranged and repatterned, and you come back from it and sort of you're changed, you're transformed, which is another thing that like a Black brother couldn't do, is be transformed.
Well, it might be worth noting that like he doesn't, in this particular letter, the writer, which I'm going to assume is Crowley, belabor the point of like what a good example of someone crossing the abyss is, other than with the metaphorical language of the pile of dust. And but he does go a little further in points of clarification of like the failure mode, and actually speaks pretty well to what Mr. Parsons here suggested in the line, in such cases, a man policy, of course, is to break off relations with the supernal triad and replace it by inventing a false crown of death. So in other words, this is like wallowing in that abyss. It's just kind of being stuck there, not knowing that you're stuck there, and maybe having a whole lot of illusions about not necessarily being stuck there. He continues, to them, knowledge will be everything, but what is knowledge but the very soul of illusion? Now, that's a harsh criticism of knowledge,
Sure.
which makes sense in context, because, if you do have some sort of transcendent knowledge, you're going to have, or wisdom, understanding, whatever, you're going to have to, if you are authentically something like a Magus, have to like translate that shit, right?
Sure,
Crowley certainly.
And let go of it as well. I mean, I think you have to get rid of everything. It's your
rational function can't be the crown.
Knowledge included.
You have two parts of your brain, so it's the conjunction of the irrational and the irrational, which is the sort of marriage. So
Sure.
I think and that you bring up a great point, talking about that cutting off from the supernals. I was thinking about that, and I was like, what is it to be cut off from like the source of all light? It's almost like you become a vampire, because you have to like take other people. I think there's a footnote that Crowley says, they always want to use somebody else's blood and not their own as the sacrifice. So, it's kind of like you become almost a vampire, because you can't sort of connect to those higher powers and feed yourself. And I wanted to go back to something that Jason was asking about the HGA. So there actually is a really great chapter in another book that Crowley wrote. I believe it's the Magic and Theory and Practice, about, some of this, black magic and such. And, he's like, basically the main thing you want to do is find your HGA, because your HGA will lead you over the abyss. And he even talks about that kind of in The Vision and the Voice. He has a passage where it talks about the only way that you can cross the abyss, the only form you could possibly hope to have if you want to cross the abyss, is to take on the form of your angel. And that's what will basically take you there. And that's sort of a lot of the point of like finding your angel is, it is the connection to the supernal powers.
And two, I think the what Jason was saying about the Atma Darshana, the Shiva Darshana, I think that's, from my understanding of those states, that's a knowledge of self that you attain that knowledge of self through a trance state or through devotion. But it's not, at least in Crowley's mind, and from what I understand of what Thelema says, it's not really the same as the HGA or that knowledge and conversation, which is a more sublime knowledge of self, if that makes sense. That may just be kind of circling around words, but it's not the same as crossing the abyss, which is a different level of attainment. Knowledge and conversation comes at Tifereth, on the Tree of Life. And what we're talking about here happens higher up, just under the supernals.
So Christian is asking, let's see, how do you find your angel? What so much of our what we build in our lives around our reflection of the ego personality? Do you dump your life entirely in order to rebuild it as perfectly balanced? And what would be the point of existence if it isn't for the experience of imbalance that allows us to feel the depth of emotion? Or emotion, I'm not sure what emotion would be. Sometimes, yeah, you do have to really kind of fuck up your life. That's what initiation will do frequently in the beginning stages, is just kick over everything on that foundation that is not working for you will fall, because you want a strong foundation if you're going to reach those heights. So yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that happens, but the idea there is that you're pursuing your true will as we're doing this work, and as either on an initiatory way or on some other way, as we do this work of self-exploration, if we get closer and closer to following our true will, if we have knowledge of that, and if we're actually doing our true will, a lot of the things that don't align with that will are the things that you're talking about that you just are dumping. And it makes sense to do it at the it's not like your life just falls apart, although I suppose that could happen. But essentially, as Ruth said, you're realigning your life in accordance with your true will. So a lot of those things they may seem really important because they're ego driven, or they're, you're very attached to them, but they're really not, in the larger picture, they're really not all that important.
And ego is important to have below, the supernals. I would like to say that, a lot of people say, oh, practicing like getting rid of my ego doesn't matter. And they allow really bad things to happen to them because they're like, trying to be these martyrs. And that's really unbalanced and unhealthy too. That's why you need kind of the balance of the tree, is to say, not only like, I don't want that. That's not for me. I'm going to reject that. That's not who I am anymore. But then you see, oh, but I am really that. That's what I am. Holy shit. This is a thing I've always loved, but I've never pursued. I've never allowed myself because I thought it was egotistical. So, having a healthy ego up to a certain extent can be like, is really important just to live in Western society and to be a human being.
It's a useful tool.
We have it for a reason.
Yeah, we have it for a reason, and it's useful. But like with anything, like with logic or thinking, it's like if it's overbalanced, then it becomes too much, But if you can look at yourself and your ego take a step back with some dispassion, then the ego can be completely useful, and it's a good thing to have.
It might also be worth kind of looking at the idea that the finding of the true will with the reaching knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel, like that's not something in Abramelin. That is a Crowley innovation. And if anything, it is the means to validate if you did have the genuine experience of connecting with that supernal thing, because if you didn't, if you're just fooling yourself, then you won't be able to do anything different in your life. But if it did transform you, that should come with certain new capabilities and capacities. And that transcends just the grade work of, oh, well, you're supposed to spend some time attaining that, whether it's by 6 months being a pious asshole, then being a megalomaniacal demon summoner like an Abermelon, or, and I speak as a former megalomaniac, hopefully former, but is there something that is genuinely different, and can you express that out in the world? And if the answer is no, you didn't do it.
Yeah. And the part of the idea of the whole tree of life system is that as you work your way up the tree, you're doing so with a sense of balance. And so it's not, I don't think, in my experience, and been working with the system for almost 10 years now, it's not that your life falls apart unless you were really in a bad state already. But, it's a step-by-step process where you work with the energies of each of the spheres. And while you're working within that sphere, you may be off the center pillar of the middle pillar of the tree. You're in an unbalanced, working with Netsock or working with Hode, unbalanced in that way, but you always come back to the center eventually. And so it does, it's a system that doesn't do it all at once. You're working piece by piece up the tree. So there is a sense of progress.
And I want to return this back to the text, because I'm really excited, to talk about talk about the text, because Crowley, brings in the vision and the voice. And so, if you haven't explored sort of like what the vision and the voice is, it's a rad book, and he's basically scrying the Enochian aethers. So the Enochian aethers, something invented or sort of discovered, the Enochian language was discovered by John Dee and Edward Kelly and during the Renaissance era. And it kind of wasn't really used that often until kind of like the Golden Dawn brought it back, and Crowley was actually one of the first people to make a record of him scrying the Enochian aethers. And basically it's 30, it's these 30 heavens, these 30 worlds sort of concentrically surrounding the earth that, Crowley traveled to. And so it's just weird because most of this chapter is about vision and the voice, and him being like, but look, the vision and the voice says this about Black brothers, it says this about crossing the abyss. So, just looking at the source text and trying to figure out what he's talking about is really fascinating. I like to use the model, I obviously as a member of the Temple of the Silver Star, one of my teachers is Dr. David Shoemaker, and he has a book, The Winds of Wisdom, that he, has his own scrying experiences that he published. But in the intro, he says that the scryers themselves, they're these successive layers of consciousness, essentially, and they're ruled by, governors. And the further one ventures into these realms, the more personal spiritual development is required to get useful results. So it's sort of like you have to have initiations and be expanded in order to understand all this. Even to penetrate the next layer. And so, Shoemaker basically was like, I think that this is my hypothesis of scrying, he said, is that the aethers might be mapped out across the Sephiroth in the Kabbalistic tree of life. Specifically, the aethers could be conceived as 1 through 10 is the highest Sephiroth in the highest world, Aziluth. And then 11 through 20 would be Bria in the Briatic world. So the 10 Sephiroth in the Briatic world. And then finally the aethers 21 to 30 are in the Yetziratic world, just kind of more the astral plane and easier for people to contact to. So you start at 30 and you work your way up to 1 is how the scrying of the aethers works. So just looking at how Crowley was interacting with that model and the different selections that he talks about, the 14th aether, he was basically I had so much trouble getting to the 15th and the 14th and 15th aethers. I had they were just a bitch. And I was like, why is that? Let's look where they are on the tree of life. And so basically, I believe the 14th aether would be mapped out to Hesed, and you're trying to cross to Binah in this aether theoretically. And so it was just a really difficult thing to do. Is basically you're crossing the abyss in Bria, in the Briatic world. So that's kind of just like an interesting factoid. And then when you actually read, the quotation and start reading the aether, it's called, I'm going to mangle this, Uti. It is actually known as the Binah, as the Salt Sea. It's kind of, that's how he translates it in the footnote in the Vision and the Voice. And then he talks about the blackness gathering about, clinging and penetrating. He has a note about this blackness being the color of Binah, the absolute negation of light, which Binah absorbs perfectly. So here we have this idea of being absorbed and like the gravitation from, Hesed to Binah. And then there's just like all of these quotations that he picks all have kind of Babylon in them. They have chaos. They have like, the angel has to lead thee as part of it. And it's really interesting to see how he uses this visionary text and like talks about these parts where he's like, oh my God, I'm being pulled toward Binah. This is crazy. And, if you read through them and you like simultaneously with like having the Vision and the Voice and the footnotes, a lot of like sort of information arises about like the Whore of Babylon and like really having to attain understanding without relying on the false Sephiroth of Thoth and knowledge. You have to like let it all go. And I don't know, Rex, if you went into those like it's sometimes it's hard to get into the Vision of the Voice unless you have those footnotes, and like it's a lot to go through. Half of this chapter is devoted to that.
Yeah, well, I think like you, I was looking at those quotes from Vision and the Voice in terms of like why is he including these in this discussion, and I think you're right. I think he's talking about that they do relate to that crossing of the abyss and what is beyond, and they do. There's several mentions of black brothers or black, different references that are related to it, and so I know that's why he's doing that.
Yeah, he talks about you have to take on the name Nemo if you're going to be if you're going to cross and attain that degree of Master of the Temple. Nemo is the Latin word for nobody, so you basically can't have a name if you're going to like you cross the abyss. You leave it all behind. Let's see. Is the fear of death or loss of form what he is saying? We have to completely let go. Like the ego personality is a way of clinging to life. At that level, at the level of supernals, yeah. The interesting thing, what really struck me about like this whole text and just thinking like left-hand path, right-hand path was also like the sort of contradictions within like the supernal triad versus the rest of the tree. And if you get to those visions, the highest visions, I believe he gets to like, the third aether, and he quotes from the seventh aether. If you read those aethers, the scrying of the aethers, especially the third one, it's crazy. It's you're like, wow, this is really violent and gross. And I was like, why is this? Because this is supposed to be Binah in Azuluth, if you're doing the Kabbalistic model. But then I remembered, something really interesting that L'Anmil Duquette said was basically like, when you get to those high levels of the supernals, everything seems like a crazy lie. Like all the contradictions of life become unified. It's not a place where the rational mind works. So it's to us living in this world, the tree below, Hesed, the supernals seems like a really like just crazy place. It seems like off-putting, like people say, oh, I had a vision of the angel and they had all these crazy eyes, it's be not afraid, but yeah, it's scary if you're still in a human body and you're just like, I'm just Ruth sitting here in my house and an angel shows up, Rex, did you have anything to say on the supernals?
Well, only just echoing what you said. I think, if you're talking about what happens above the abyss, it is not rational. But there is also a sense of all extremes, like everything is accounted for. So you're talking about there's no division between one thing and another. And I think that's where people often get confused, and where some of these visionary qualities can be really extreme, but those extremes are really just, I don't know, it's difficult to describe, but I think in terms of the way that everything above the abyss is all one is the basic idea. And you can still have extremes, but there's really no division between any one thing and another.
And also, if you already kind of let go of your personality and let go of like who you are and your form, then which should you be afraid of? You can't turn into a pile of dust twice, in the supernals.
A lot of it just comes back to the idea of love as being union, and the individual can't survive that union. It's the dissolution thing you spoke about earlier. Whereas, and some people get into that, they never want to really give you everything, They don't really want it, and that's to me that's the sin of restriction, right? Is that holding back, the withholding of oneself.
Yeah, he even says that in the text. The Black Brothers, they try to cling, in the vision, they're they that grasp love and clung thereto, praying ever at the knees of the great goddess, that they have shut themselves up in the fortress of love. And also the other thing that I always love, like, the whore of Babylon, what is a whore but someone who just takes and takes and takes, like, yeah, just give it all, like. So I love that the whore of Babylon keeps coming up. She's like, come on, baby, come here. Whatever you got, I'm going to take it. And, I think, allowing yourself to just like surrender and not be this rigid form. It sounds hella sexual, but Crowley had to surrender when he was writing The Vision and the Voice too. There was some pretty taboo things that he had to do in order to like break through and gain spiritual liberation. It looks like Rex has left me.
Yeah, my webcam decided to take a dump, so I'm still here.
Cross the abyss. Are you in the abyss?
I think so.
Oh no.
We've got some good comments on the side here. In terms of it might be interesting to, David says it might be interesting to cross-reference with Buddhist Zen ideas of realizing emptiness. It's not like the personality evaporates, but perhaps becomes transparent or held lightly instead of with a white knuckle grasp. And I think that sense of letting go is partly what we're talking about here. You're letting go of fear. You're letting go of all the ideas that you previously have of yourself and everything you know.
And David Lake says, I like Crowley's idea, the difference between marriage and taking a concubine. Yeah, so you're not, joined together, you're like owning something. So, just, back to the idea, thank you, Stephen, of love under will. And will, what is will but the highest? It's not you, it's the highest. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, we've hit sort of, I think, the 40-minute mark at least. So, does anyone else have anything they wanted to just like add to the discussion? I mean, we can keep talking. I'm not going to shut you down.
Scarab Core had a good question here. A fun topic related to the text. Can anyone think of any notable examples of a Black brother? Crowley might have thought that Frater Akkad was a Black brother, I would think. Jack Parsons, perhaps.
It's funny because usually it's in hindsight when he would decide that.
Yeah.
And it would usually involve a falling out with him.
Yeah.
But so it goes. Honestly, I've got one off the top of my head that this is a person who I didn't know personally, but I know people who knew him, and that was a dude named Anton LaVey, like particularly towards the end of his life. Because I don't know if anyone's like familiar with some of the literature you find in LaVeyan Satanism, but there is one particular paper, I believe it was written in 1988, that was called Pentagonal Revisionism. And among the things that he put in it, he kind of showed like the fifth point was that a person should be able to create a total environment that they could just hang out in and, you know, be their utmost self and just indulge in whatever it is that you might happen to have in there, including with like some really funny ideas that I think Pete Gilmore added to it, like having artificial humans to provide, you know, the proper master or slave to you in that
Sounds
context.
like real dolls, maybe.
I mean, yeah, specifically
well,
that
I don't
too.
see. I don't think
But, like,
LeVay would have a problem with being called the Black Brother, though. He's not
nah,
Thelemic, you know.
oh, probably
So
not.
it
Well,
might be
but I
something
mean,
he strove towards, and you know,
yeah,
I don't know. I hesitate from like, you know, naming too many names or cast, you know, sort of
sure.
casting. I mean, we could say I think probably Hitler maybe was a Black Brother,
Yeah.
but I mean, was he even aspiring towards liberation? You know, do you?
Nah.
I don't know. Yeah, right. So,
Oh.
I think, you know, I tend to just like, you know, I think that's for the supernal triad and the abyss to judge who is a Black Brother. You know, I don't think any of us would want, you know, sort of if we were maybe practicing left hand path or lower magic or whatever, you know, we wouldn't want to be judged by others, or maybe we would if we were Anton LaVey. But
Yeah.
you know,
Well, but I mean, you know, this was a guy who towards the end of his life spent an inordinate amount of time in his basement, which was set up like an old sailor bar with more mannequins than people playing Parcheesi. And that ain't how I want to finish out my time, you know? Now, some of the people who were playing with him were like more interesting, but,
sure.
you know.
I mean, depending on how this pandemic ends, we might all just have mannequin friends.
Well, I mean, that is actually a good point. Doug Rushkoff just recently wrote an article on that particular point. I think it's called like the billionaires have already made their escape pods or something like that, which is worth Googling because it's actually a very good article. Douglas Rushkoff, the
we'll
author.
Look it up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for, you know, participating. You know,
Thanks everyone.
I knew this would be kind of a controversial topic, but I love drama. So I'm a messy bitch. So not really. Not at all. But you know, I just wanted to get it out there and kind of let people sort of, you know, I think Crowley often gets labeled as someone who's scary, and I want people to be a little bit less scared of him and maybe more interested in just reading what he actually wrote, you know, because he did write a lot of really cool things, and now we can read them because they're all up on the internet now. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm just going to end this for, you know, purposes of YouTube. So if we can keep talking if you want. I just wanted to kind of wrap it up in a.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
There was one thing is kind of a recap of stuff we've already talked about, but just for me, one thing this really underscores is like the necessity of not just using my old way of thinking towards pursuing new aims, but actually changing the way I think about how I bring myself to the work. You know, again, it's not like taking like bourgeois careerism and applying it to, you know, to the divine, but actually changing my relationship to that, and that building that relationship is the whole work for me anyway.
Yeah, actual
of power, you know.
Actual transformation.
Actual transformation.
Yeah. It's hard to get through if you are used to like the bourgeois, you know, corporate world where you're just supposed to climb the ladder. You know?
Yeah, and you just bring that to whatever you do. So you say, hey, look, there's this cool magical stuff. I'm just going to go, you know, I'm going to get all that, you know, and it's not for us to say whether somebody else is doing it, but I definitely know when I'm, you know, when I'm in alignment or when I'm just grasping, you know, I can feel you can feel the difference.
Yeah, write it in your diary, you know, then you know what states make that happen, and you can go back and reference them. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Great session.
Yeah, great questions.
Right on. See you next week then.
Yeah, and next week, forgot to announce for everyone. If anyone wants me to email them personally, I'll post my email address. But the next chapter, we decided we're going to do kind of the last minute. We're like, what should we do? I like chapter 17, covering the astral journey. So we'll talk a little bit about astral travel, which is different than scrying, I think. Maybe not, maybe. We'll see what Crowley has to say. Yeah, astral journeying. So hopefully
Fun.
we'll have some people who astral travel and they can contribute to the conversation.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.